The moment Clara Vaughn slid into the back seat of his Mercedes and whispered, "Don't take me home," Ethan Park knew his carefully constructed life was about to shatter. For 3 years, he'd been the invisible man, the trusted driver who saw everything and said nothing, who knew which affairs to forget and which arguments never happened. But tonight, in the rearview mirror, he saw something that changed everything. The wife of the most powerful man in Los Angeles wasn't crying. She was deciding. And when a woman like Clara Vaughn stops crying and starts deciding, someone's world is going to burn. I'm going to take you through a story about the price of seeing what you're not supposed to see and the cost of finally being seen. Stay with me until the end. I promise you won't regret it. And please, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Ethan Park had perfected the art of being nobody. At 32, he'd spent the last 3 years as a driver for Vaughn Capital Management, one of those sprawling financial empires that shaped the Los Angeles skyline without most people knowing its name. He wore expensive suits purchased from discount outlets, drove cars worth more than his annual salary, and had mastered the particular skill of fading into leather seats until he became part of the upholstery. The rich didn't want drivers who talked. They wanted furniture that could operate a vehicle. So that's what Ethan became. He picked up Marcus Vaughn's dry cleaning without being asked. He knew which route avoided traffic on Wilshire at 4 p.m. He understood that when Mr. Vaughn took calls in the back seat, Ethan's ears were supposed to stop working, and when Mrs. Vaughn came home with shopping bags from stores she'd never mentioned visiting, Ethan's memory was supposed to reset like a goldfish. It was easy work, in its way. Easier than his previous job managing a Jiffy Lube in Koreatown, certainly better than the retail positions before that. The pay was exceptional, almost suspicious in its generosity, and the hours, while long, were predictable. Ethan sent money to his mother in Glendale every month. He had a small apartment in Silver Lake with a view of a wall. He read library books about business management and told himself this was temporary, that he was building towards something. He'd been telling himself that for 3 years. "Ethan, I need you at the gallery by 11, Marcus Vaughn said that Thursday morning, his voice carrying the particular tone of a man who'd never considered that someone might say no. "Clara's at some art opening. Bring her home." "Yes, sir." Ethan had driven Clara Vaughn perhaps 50 times in 3 years. She was always polite, always distant, always silent except for brief directions. She dressed like someone in a magazine, expensive clothes that looked uncomfortable, jewelry that probably cost more than his car, hair that had been professionally arranged to look casually perfect. She was 30 years old and looked like a woman playing a role she'd forgotten she auditioned for. The gallery was in West Hollywood, one of those aggressively minimalist spaces where the absence of furniture was somehow supposed to indicate sophistication. Ethan pulled up at exactly 11 p.m., parking in a loading zone, because men like Marcus Vaughn didn't worry about parking tickets. Clara emerged 20 minutes later. Even from a distance, Ethan could see something was different. Her hair had come partially undone. Her makeup was smudged near one eye. Not dramatically, just enough to suggest she'd rubbed at tears and then tried to fix the damage. She walked with the careful precision of someone who'd had exactly 2 glasses of wine more than they'd intended. She slid into the back seat and sat in silence. Ethan waited. Protocol was clear. He didn't speak unless spoken to. "Don't take me home," Clara said quietly. Ethan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Mrs. Vaughn, Mr. Vaughn asked me to—" "I know what my husband asked you to do." Her voice was steady, but there was something underneath it, not anger, but something colder, more dangerous. "Decision. I'm asking you not to. Just drive. Anywhere that isn't that house." This was the moment. Ethan had watched enough of Marcus Vaughn's business calls to understand leverage and consequences. He knew what happened to people who forgot their place in the ecosystem. The smart move was to apologize politely, explain that he had to follow Mr. Vaughn's instructions, and deliver Clara home like an Amazon package. Instead, he heard himself say, "Where would you like to go?" Clara laughed, a short, sharp sound that had nothing to do with humor. "I have absolutely no idea." Ethan put the car in drive and headed east, away from the manicured perfection of the hills, down into the real city where lights flickered and people shouted and life happened in ways that couldn't be controlled by money or position. "There's a jazz bar in Echo Park," he said. "Nothing fancy. Live music on Thursdays." "You go there?" "I used to. Before this job, I had time for things like that." Clara was quiet for several blocks. When she finally spoke, her voice was different, less performance, more actual person. "What's it called?" "The Blue Room. It's in a basement. You have to walk past a laundromat to find the entrance." "Take me there." The Blue Room was exactly what its name suggested, a small basement space painted in various shades of blue, with mismatched tables, questionable ventilation, and a quartet that played like they were trying to exercise something. The crowd was local. Artists, students, night shift workers stopping in before heading home. Clara Vaughn, in her designer dress and uncomfortable shoes, looked like she'd wandered in from another planet. "We should get you something less..." Ethan gestured vaguely at her outfit. "Expensive?" "Noticeable." There was a vintage clothing store still open 2 blocks away, the kind that Los Angeles specialized in. Part thrift shop, part museum, entirely run by someone's incredibly opinionated aunt. Clara emerged 15 minutes later in jeans that actually fit like jeans and a plain black sweater that probably cost $12 and made her look more like herself than anything Ethan had ever seen her wear. "Better?" she asked. "You look like a person." I forgot what that felt like. They found a table in the back corner. Ethan ordered whiskey because it seemed like that kind of night. Clara ordered the same and then immediately added water because she clearly wasn't used to drinking anything that wasn't served in crystal. The quartet was playing something slow and complicated, full of the kind of pain that sounded beautiful when you put it to music. "How long have you worked for Marcus?" Clara asked. 3 years? "Do you like it?" Ethan considered lying, then decided he was too tired. "The money's good. The work is easy. I'm very good at being invisible. I've noticed you have this way of disappearing while you're standing right there. It's impressive, actually, like a magic trick." "It's what the job requires." Clara took a sip of her diluted whiskey and grimaced. "Everything requires disappearing, apparently. Marriage, charity boards, gallery openings. You just slowly fade until you're not sure if you were ever actually there." "How long have you been married?" 7 years. I was 23, fresh out of art school, teaching kids to paint at a community center in Santa Monica. Marcus came in because his company was sponsoring the program. PR, tax write-off, whatever. He was older, successful, interested. He looked at me like I was the most fascinating person he'd ever met. What changed? Nothing changed. That's the problem. He still looks at me exactly the same way, like I'm a painting he bought. Beautiful. Valuable. Hung in exactly the right place where everyone can admire his taste. But you don't ask a painting what it wants. You don't have conversations with furniture. The music shifted into something faster, more aggressive. People were starting to dance in the small space between tables, bodies moving with the kind of unself-conscious joy that only happened after midnight in places that didn't care about appearances. "I met with a divorce attorney 6 months ago," Clara said suddenly. "Nice woman. Office in Century City. She laid out everything. California is a community property state. I'd get half of everything. I could walk away and never worry about money again. She gave me her card and told me to think about it." "What did you do?" "I went home. I put the card in my desk drawer, and I got ready for a dinner party where 14 people told me how lucky I was to have found a man like Marcus." Clara's laugh was bitter. "Do you know what the worst part is? He's not cruel. He doesn't yell. He doesn't drink too much or stay out all night or any of the things that would make this easy. He just decides what I wear, where we go, who we see, what version of myself I'm allowed to be. And he does it so reasonably, so logically, that arguing feels like being crazy." Ethan had no idea what to say to that. He'd spent 3 years watching the Vaughns from the front seat, the careful distance between them, the way Marcus spoke to Clara like she was a particularly pleasant employee, the way Clara smiled at parties like someone who'd been hired to smile. "I saw my paintings yesterday," Clara continued, "the ones from before. Marcus keeps them in storage. Climate-controlled, professionally wrapped, completely inaccessible. I asked if I could set up a small studio in one of the spare rooms. Do you know what he said? Darling, we have 5 spare rooms. Which one were you thinking? Like it was a negotiation, like he was being generous by letting me use space in my own house. Did you pick one? I didn't answer. I just stood there in that hallway with its perfect lighting and its perfectly curated art collection, and I realized I don't remember the last time I made a decision, a real one. Not what to order at a restaurant or which charity event to attend, but something that mattered, something that was mine. The quartet finished their set. In the brief silence before they started the next song, Ethan could hear the city above them, cars passing, someone shouting, the electrical hum of Los Angeles at night. You're making one now, he said. Am I? Or am I just having a breakdown in a jazz bar with my husband's employee? Does it matter? Clara looked at him directly for the first time all evening. You know he's going to fire you for this. Probably. And you still brought me here. You asked me to. Most people don't do what I ask. They do what Marcus wants and pretend it's the same thing. The band started playing again, something old and familiar that Ethan couldn't quite name. A woman at the next table was singing along under her breath, getting half the words wrong but not caring. I need to tell you something, Clara said, and I need you to not be polite about it, not try to make me feel better. Just tell me the truth. Okay. Am I crazy? For wanting something different? For thinking that maybe being comfortable and secure and envied isn't the same as being happy? Everyone tells me how lucky I am. My mother. My friends, well, the people who used to be my friends before they became Marcus's wife's friends. Even my therapist, in her subtle way, keeps suggesting I'm depressed, like the problem is chemistry instead of circumstance. Ethan set down his glass. My father worked in a factory in Seoul for 30 years, same job, same shift, same lunch at the same time every day. When he retired, they gave him a watch and a handshake. He died 6 months later. At the funeral, my uncle said my father had been lucky, stable job, good benefits, respect in the community. My mother didn't say anything, but I saw her face. She was thinking about all the things my father never got to do, never got to be, because lucky was supposed to be enough. Was she angry? I think she was sad, for him, for herself, for all the years they spent being grateful for something that looked like a good life from the outside, but felt like slow suffocation from the inside. Moz Clara was crying now, silent tears that she didn't bother to wipe away. I'm not ungrateful. I didn't think you were. I know women who'd kill for what I have. That doesn't mean you have to want it. The blue room was getting crowded, bodies pressed together, the air thick with smoke and sweat, and the particular electricity of people who'd found the frequency they were looking for. Someone bumped their table, apologized, kept dancing. I don't know how to leave, Clara said quietly. I don't know how to be the person who destroys her marriage, disappoints everyone, chooses uncertainty over security. That's not who I was raised to be. Who were you raised to be? Grateful, accommodating, someone who makes things easier for everyone else. How's that working out? Clara laughed, a real one this time, spectacularly awful. They stayed until the bar closed at 2 a.m. They didn't dance. They didn't talk about Marcus. They just sat in that blue basement and listened to music that understood things couldn't be fixed with money or logic or carefully calibrated decisions. When they finally emerged onto the street, Los Angeles was in that strange late-night state where it belonged to whoever was still awake. Delivery trucks, night shift workers, people making either very good or very bad decisions. I should take you home, Ethan said. I know, but neither of them moved toward the car. Drive up to the Overlook, Claire said. The one on Mulholland. I want to see the city. The Overlook was empty except for one other car, far enough away to provide privacy. The city spread out below them, a constellation of lights that made promises it couldn't keep. They sat on the hood of the Mercedes, expensive metal that neither of them cared about denting. I'm going to leave him, Clara said. It wasn't a question or a possibility. It was a statement of fact, said out loud for the first time, made real by being spoken. When? I don't know. Soon. I need to find that attorney's card. I need to figure out where I'll go. Probably my sister's place in Portland while everything gets sorted. I need to... She stopped. I need to stop being afraid of what happens next. Fear's reasonable. It's a big change. I've been afraid for 7 years. I'm tired of it. I'm tired of waking up in a house that feels like a museum. I'm tired of being careful. I'm tired of being the right kind of wife for a man who never asked what kind of person I wanted to be. Ethan thought about his apartment in Silver Lake, his library books about business management, his mother in Glendale, who still asked when he was going to start his real career. He thought about 3 years of being invisible, of being furniture, of telling himself it was temporary while it became permanent. "I'm going to quit," he heard himself say. Clara turned to look at him. "What?" "Your husband's going to fire me anyway. Might as well beat him to it. Go back to regular work. Cars that aren't worth more than houses, customers who actually see me as a person instead of a service. You don't have to do that." "I know, but I think I want to." He surprised himself by meaning it. "I've been so focused on what this job looks like, the salary, the access, the idea that I was moving up somehow, that I forgot to notice what it actually is. I'm 32 years old and I spend my days being nobody. That's not strategic. That's just sad." They sat in silence, watching the city breathe below them. "This is probably the most honest conversation I've had in years," Clara said. "Same. We're going to ruin each other's lives, aren't we? You'll lose your job. I'll lose my marriage, my house, probably half my friends. People are going to think we're having an affair." "Are we?" Clara considered this. "No, this is something different. This is two people who are drowning, remembering how to breathe." The eastern sky was starting to lighten, that particular gray that came before dawn. The other car at the overlook started its engine and drove away, taillights disappearing down the winding road. "I should really take you home now," Ethan said. "I know." This time they got in the car. The drive back to the Vaughn mansion took 20 minutes. The house was dark except for a single light in Marcus's study. He was either still working or had fallen asleep at his desk, both equally likely. Clara didn't get out immediately. "Thank you." "For what?" "For not telling me I'm being dramatic. For not suggesting I'm having a midlife crisis at 30. For just listening." "You're welcome." "This is going to get complicated." "Probably." "Marcus is going to be angry. Not loud angry. He doesn't do that, but cold. Strategic. He's going to try to make this as difficult as possible, not because he loves me, but because he doesn't like losing." Ethan nodded. He'd seen Marcus Vaughn negotiate enough business deals to know exactly how that particular war would be waged. Clara opened the car door, then paused. "The attorney's name is Rebecca Chen. Her office is on Avenue of the Stars. I'm going to call her tomorrow. Today, actually. I'm going to do this." "Good." She got out, then leaned back in. "Ethan, when this is over, when all the legal stuff is done and the dust settles and I'm figuring out what comes next, would you want to get coffee sometime? As actual people, not as a driver and a passenger?" "I'd like that." Clara smiled, and for the first time since Ethan had known her, it looked like something genuine. Then she walked into her house, her temporary house, her prison with a view. Ethan sat in the driveway for a moment, engine running, watching the light in Marcus Vaughn's study. Then he drove home to his apartment in Silver Lake, his view of a wall, his life that was about to get significantly more complicated. He felt awake for the first time in 3 years. The sun was coming up over Los Angeles, and everything was about to change. Ethan woke up at noon with sunlight cutting through his blinds like an accusation. His phone showed 6 missed calls from Marcus Vaughn and 3 text messages, each one progressively colder in tone. The last one simply read, "My office, 2 p.m. He lay in bed staring at the water stain on his ceiling, shaped vaguely like Florida, and tried to remember the last time he'd felt this strange combination of dread and relief. It reminded him of the day he'd quit the Jiffy Lube, when his manager had told him he was making the biggest mistake of his life, and Ethan had walked out into the parking lot feeling lighter, despite having no clear plan for what came next. His phone buzzed again. Not Marcus this time, but a number he didn't recognize. "Mr. Park, this is Rebecca Chen. Clara Vaughn gave me your number. She's asked me to represent her in divorce proceedings, and she suggested I might want to speak with you about certain observations you may have made during your employment." Ethan sat up. "What kind of observations?" "The kind that help establish a pattern of controlling behavior, financial isolation, Social manipulation, the sort of thing that's difficult to prove without corroborating testimony. Rebecca's voice was professional, efficient, and carried the undertone of someone who'd fought these battles before. I understand you're still employed by Mr. Vaughn? For about 2 more hours, probably. Then perhaps we should meet. Say, 3 o'clock? My office in Century City, after you've had your conversation with your current employer. Ethan agreed and hung up. He showered, put on one of his discount suits, and tried to imagine how this conversation with Marcus was going to go. In 3 years, he'd never been summoned to the office. Business was conducted in the car, instructions delivered in that casual tone that made everything sound optional while being absolutely mandatory. The Vaughn Capital Management Building was in downtown Los Angeles, all glass and steel, and the kind of modern architecture that looked like it was judging you. Ethan had driven Marcus here hundreds of times, but had never actually gone inside. The lobby was aggressively minimal. Marble floors, a single sculpture that probably cost more than a house, a security desk staffed by people who'd perfected the art of polite contempt. Ethan Park for Marcus Vaughn. The security guard made a call, looked vaguely surprised, and directed him to the 42nd floor. Marcus's office had a view that made the city look like a toy. He was standing at the window when Ethan entered, hands clasped behind his back, the posture of a man who'd seen this exact scene play out before and knew all the lines. "Close the door," Marcus said without turning around. Ethan did. 3 years, Marcus continued, still facing the window. 3 years of exemplary service, discretion, reliability. I paid you well above market rate because I valued those qualities. I trusted you with my schedule, my privacy, my family. He turned then, and his face was perfectly calm. So I'm trying to understand what happened last night. Mrs. Vaughn asked me to drive her somewhere. I did. She asked you to take her to a jazz bar in Echo Park and then to Mulholland Drive, where you sat with her until 4 in the morning. That's what happened? Yes. Marcus walked to his desk, picked up a tablet, and slid it across to Ethan. The screen showed a series of photos, Clara and Ethan at the Blue Room, sitting on the hood of the Mercedes, talking in the car. The angles suggested a private investigator, someone who'd been following them the entire time. I don't have my wife followed, if that's what you're thinking, Marcus said, but I have the car tracked. GPS, cameras, standard security measures for a vehicle worth $200,000. I reviewed the footage this morning. Ethan set down the tablet. Then you know nothing happened. Nothing happened, Marcus repeated, his voice taking on a dangerous edge. My wife gets into a car with my employee at 11 p.m. and doesn't come home until nearly 5 a.m., and nothing happened. Do I look stupid to you, Ethan? No, sir. Then don't insult my intelligence. I've been married long enough to recognize what this is. Claire gets restless sometimes. She has these moods. Usually a shopping trip or a spa day settles things, but occasionally she needs something more. Dramatic. A small rebellion. A taste of something different. Marcus sat on the edge of his desk, suddenly conversational. You're not the first, you know. 2 years ago, it was our tennis instructor. Handsome guy, very attentive. They had coffee a few times. She felt alive again. He made air quotes with his fingers. It passed. They always do. Ethan felt something cold settle in his stomach. There was a tennis instructor? There was a tennis instructor who I fired and who found himself unable to work at any country club in Los Angeles County. There was also a yoga teacher and briefly a photographer she met at a gallery opening. I handled these situations quietly. Everyone moves on. No one gets hurt as long as everyone remembers their place. And my place is what exactly? Marcus smiled, the expression of a teacher pleased that a slow student had finally grasped the lesson. Your place is being grateful for a job that pays 6 figures for work that requires no particular skill. Your place is understanding that last night was Clara working through something, and your role was to be safe, temporary entertainment, like a carnival ride. Fun for a moment, forgotten immediately after. I don't think that's what last night was. Of course you don't. That's what makes you useful. Clara needs someone who'll listen to her as if her feelings matter, as if she's making some profound decision instead of just being bored and dramatic. You played your part perfectly. Marcus stood, straightening his tie. Here's what happens next. You're going to continue driving for me. You're going to be professional and distant with my wife. And in a few weeks, when she's forgotten whatever nonsense she told you last night, everything will return to normal. In exchange, I'm going to forget this happened. Your salary will even increase. Let's say 10%, effective immediately. Ethan thought about his mother in Glendale, about the money he sent her every month that paid for her small apartment and her medical bills. He thought about his own rent, his carefully managed savings, the life he'd built that depended entirely on this job. Then he thought about Clara crying in the blue room, about the paintings in storage, about 7 years of being furniture. I quit, he said. Marcus's expression didn't change. Excuse me? I'm resigning, effective immediately. You can mail my final paycheck to my apartment. You're making a mistake. Probably. But it's my mistake to make. Marcus's calm finally cracked, just slightly. You stupid, naive kid. You think Clara's going to leave me? You think she's going to choose poverty and uncertainty over everything she has? She tried to leave once before, talked to a lawyer, got all excited about her independence, and then she came home. Because at the end of the day, she understands what you clearly don't. Comfort matters. Security matters. She's not going to throw away a life most people would kill for because she's bored. She's not bored. She's suffocating. Same thing, different words. Marcus walked back to the window. Get out of my office and understand something. I'm a generous man, but I'm not a forgiving one. You'll find that Los Angeles is a very small city when the right people know your name for the wrong reasons. Ethan left. His hands were shaking as he rode the elevator down, but by the time he reached the lobby, he felt that same strange lightness from years ago, that sensation of having stepped off a cliff and not yet knowing where he'd land. Rebecca Chen's office was everything Marcus Vaughn's wasn't, cluttered with case files, populated by harried-looking associates, decorated with framed degrees instead of expensive art. Rebecca herself was in her 50s, gray hair cut short, wearing a suit that prioritized function over fashion. Mr. Park, thank you for coming. She gestured to a chair across from her desk, which was buried under legal pads covered in handwritten notes. I've spent the last 3 hours with Clara. She's determined to proceed with the divorce, which is encouraging. The problem is Marcus Vaughn is exactly the kind of client who makes these cases difficult. How so? No violence, no affairs, well, none she can prove. No obvious financial crimes. Just a pattern of control so subtle and systematic that it's nearly impossible to demonstrate in court. He's never forbidden her from working. He just makes helpful suggestions about how exhausting it would be. He's never restricted her access to money. He just handles all the finances and asks her to run purchases by him. He's never isolated her from friends. They've just naturally drifted away because Clara's schedule is so carefully managed, there's never time for anyone he doesn't approve of. Ethan nodded slowly. It's like being erased in slow motion. Exactly. And in California, none of that matters for the divorce itself. It's a no-fault state. But it matters enormously for settlement negotiations. Marcus will paint Clara as unstable, impulsive, someone who can't be trusted with money or decisions. He'll draw this out, make it expensive, try to exhaust her until she accepts whatever he offers, just to make it stop. Rebecca leaned back in her chair. Which is where you might be helpful. You've been in their lives for 3 years. You've witnessed things, conversations, incidents, patterns of behavior. You want me to testify against him? I want you to be willing to give a deposition about what you've observed. Not editorialized, not dramatized, just facts. Times when Clara wanted to do something and Marcus prevented it. Instances of him controlling her schedule, her choices, her autonomy. The kind of pattern that establishes this wasn't a healthy partnership. Ethan thought about the tennis instructor Marcus had mentioned, the yoga teacher, the photographer. All of them erased from Clara's life because they'd made her feel something her husband couldn't provide. He thought about 3 years of watching a woman slowly disappear while everyone congratulated her on being so lucky. I'll do it, he said. Rebecca studied him. You understand this will have consequences? Marcus Vaughn has lawyers who will come after your credibility. They'll dig into your background, your finances, your relationships. They'll try to suggest you're lying because you're romantically involved with Clara, or because you're trying to extort money, or simply because you're a disgruntled employee. It won't be pleasant. I just quit my job and probably torched my professional reputation in this city. Unpleasant seems relative at this point. Rebecca almost smiled. Clara said you were different, that you actually listened instead of just waiting for your turn to talk. It's a rare quality. She pulled out a legal pad. Tell me about the first time you noticed something was wrong in their marriage. They talked for 2 hours. Ethan described the dinner party where Clara had expressed interest in taking a photography class, and Marcus had gently suggested she was already so busy with her charity commitments. He recounted the morning Marcus had canceled Clara's lunch with a college friend because it conflicted with a business dinner she needed to attend. He listed the times Clara had asked about resuming teaching, and Marcus had pointed out how unstable those jobs were, how it would be stressful, how she didn't need the money anyway. None of it was dramatic. None of it would make headlines. But piece by piece, it painted a picture of a woman whose life had been carefully curated until she existed only in the spaces her husband permitted. This is good, Rebecca said when they finished. Not enough to change the legal outcome. She still gets half of everything regardless, but enough to prevent Marcus from painting her as incompetent or irrational. That matters. She closed her notebook. One more question. What's your relationship with Clara? I drove her places for 3 years. Last night we had a conversation. That's all? That's all. Rebecca nodded, but her expression suggested she heard what Ethan wasn't saying. Marcus is going to claim otherwise. You should be prepared for that. Ethan left the office as the sun was setting, turning the glass buildings into mirrors of fire. His phone showed a text from Clara. Thank you for meeting with Rebecca. I know this is asking a lot. He typed back, It's not. How are you doing? The response came quickly. Scared, relieved, both at once. Is that normal? Probably. Marcus knows I met with Rebecca. He's being very calm about it, very reasonable. It's terrifying. Ethan could imagine it perfectly. Marcus in full control, explaining with perfect logic why divorce was unnecessary, how they could work through this, how Clara was being impulsive and emotional. Do you have somewhere safe to stay? He texted. My sister's flying in tomorrow. We're going to a hotel while we figure out the next steps. Rebecca suggested it was better to establish physical separation early. Good. Ethan, I meant what I said last night. When this is over, I want to get coffee. As people. Not as whatever we were before. I'd like that too. He went home to his apartment in Silver Lake, his view of a wall, his life that had imploded in less than 24 hours. He should have felt panicked. No job, no prospects, no plan. Instead, he felt clear-headed in a way he hadn't experienced in years. His phone rang. His mother. Ethan, I got your check. It's too much again. You need to save for yourself. I can afford it, Mom. For how long? You never tell me anything about this job. Is it stable? Are they treating you well? He'd never told his mother what he actually did for Marcus Vaughn. She thought he was in financial services, something vague and respectable that justified the salary. The truth felt too much like admitting he'd become exactly what his father had been, invisible, replaceable, grateful for scraps. I quit today, he said. Silence on the other end. Then, why? Because I was good at being nobody, and it turns out that's not actually a skill worth developing. Ethan, that makes no sense. I know, but it's true anyway. His mother sighed, the particular sound of a parent who'd spent decades translating their child's incomprehensible decisions into something resembling logic. Do you have another job? Not yet. Do you have savings? Some. Then you're a fool, but you're not a stupid fool. There's a difference. She paused. Your father would have kept that job. He would have said security matters more than pride. I know. But he also died having never taken a risk in his life, and I think he regretted that more than any of us understood. Her voice softened. Be careful, but be brave. And call me when you figure out what comes next. After they hung up, Ethan sat on his couch and finally let himself think about what he'd actually done. He'd walked away from financial security to help a woman he barely knew escape a marriage that looked perfect from every angle that mattered to the outside world. He'd made himself an enemy of a powerful man who'd explicitly told him Los Angeles was a small city. He'd also, for the first time in years, done something that felt true. His phone buzzed with an email. Marcus Vaughn's lawyers, formally terminating his employment and reminding him of the non-disclosure agreement he'd signed 3 years ago. The implication was clear. Talk about what you've seen, and we'll bury you in legal fees. Ethan forwarded it to Rebecca Chen with a simple note. Is this enforceable? Her response came within minutes. Only for proprietary business information. They can't stop you from testifying about personal observations in a legal proceeding. They're trying to scare you. Don't let them. He looked around his apartment. Cheap furniture, library books, a life he'd assembled from discount stores and careful budgeting. None of it was impressive. None of it was enviable. But all of it was his, chosen, real. His phone buzzed again. Clara. My sister and I are at the Chateau Marmont. Marcus tried to cancel my credit cards, but Rebecca got a temporary restraining order preventing any financial changes until the settlement. Small victories. How does it feel? Like jumping off a cliff, terrifying, exhilarating. I can't tell if I'm brave or just finally broken enough to not care about the consequences. Maybe both. Maybe that's what brave actually is. Thank you for today. For Rebecca. For all of it. I know you didn't have to. Yes, I did. He meant it. There were things you could walk away from and things that would haunt you if you did. Clara's face in the blue room, finally letting herself cry, finally letting herself want something different, that wasn't the kind of thing you could unsee. Ethan spent the evening updating his resume, a document he hadn't looked at in 3 years. The employment gap was going to be awkward to explain. Driver for wealthy executive looked either impressive or servile depending on how you presented it, and either way raised questions about why he'd left. He settled on private transportation specialist, and tried not to think about how pretentious it sounded. Around midnight, his phone rang again. Unknown number. Mr. Park, this is James Chen, Marcus Vaughn's attorney. I'm calling as a courtesy to let you know that Mr. Vaughn is considering legal action regarding your breach of fiduciary duty and violation of privacy agreements. However, he's willing to forego litigation if you're willing to sign a statement confirming that nothing inappropriate occurred between yourself and Mrs. Vaughn, and that you have no reason to believe Mr. Vaughn behaved in any controlling or abusive manner during his marriage. Ethan could hear the script in the man's voice, the careful phrasing that sounded like an offer, but was actually a threat. Tell Mr. Vaughn I'll be happy to discuss my observations with his wife's attorney or in a formal legal proceeding. Otherwise, I have nothing to say. That's unfortunate. Mr. Vaughn was hoping to resolve this amicably. I'm sure he was. Ethan hung up and immediately called Rebecca, who answered despite the late hour. They're already trying to intimidate you, she said after he'd explained. That's actually good news. It means they're worried about what you might say. Document everything, every call, every email, every contact, and don't engage directly. All communication goes through me now. After they hung up, Ethan tried to sleep, but his mind kept circling back to the same thought. 24 hours ago, he'd been nobody, invisible, safe. Now he was in the middle of a war between two people with more money and power than he'd ever have, and his only weapon was the truth about what he'd witnessed. It should have felt foolish. Instead, it felt necessary. His phone lit up with one final text from Clara. I'm scared I'm going to wake up tomorrow and lose my nerve, that I'm going to call Marcus and apologize and go back to that house and pretend the last 2 days never happened. He stared at the message for a long moment, then typed, Then don't go to sleep yet. Stay awake. Make it to morning. Make one choice at a time. Is that what you're doing? Yes. Is it working? Ask me tomorrow. But even as he sent it, Ethan knew the answer. He'd already crossed the line. There was no going back to being furniture, no returning to the comfortable invisibility he'd perfected. Whatever came next, unemployment, legal battles, the systematic dismantling of his credibility, at least it would be real. At least he would be seen. Morning came with the kind of aggressive sunshine that made Los Angeles feel like it was mocking anyone having a bad day. Ethan woke up to 17 new emails, most of them automated job alerts for positions he was overqualified for or underqualified for, with nothing in between. One was from Rebecca Chen with the subject line, Deposition scheduled, 2 weeks, and an attachment that was probably several dozen pages of legal preparation he didn't want to think about yet. He made coffee and sat at his small kitchen table, looking at his bank account on his phone. 3 months of expenses, maybe 4 if he was careful. After that, things would get complicated. His phone rang. Unknown number again, but this time he answered. Ethan Park? A woman's voice, bright and professional. This is Jennifer Walsh from Los Angeles Magazine. I'm working on a piece about Marcus Vaughn, business profile, the usual, and I understand you worked for him recently. Would you be willing to answer a few questions? How did you get my number? A source. Look, I'm not trying to cause problems. I just want to get a complete picture. Off the record if you prefer. Ethan hung up. 2 minutes later, his phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. Do not talk to reporters. Marcus's team is planting stories. Anything you say will be twisted. He texted back. Already figured that out. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of job applications and growing anxiety. He'd worked in car sales before the driver position, had managed a service center, had some customer relations experience. None of it felt substantial enough to explain the gap, to justify why he'd left a 6-figure job for uncertainty. Around noon, Clara called. Are you okay? He asked. Define okay. Her voice sounded raw, like she'd been crying or hadn't slept, or both. My sister flew back to Portland this morning. Work emergency. Marcus has been calling every hour. Very concerned, very loving, asking if I'm safe, if I need anything, reminding me that we can work through this together. He's staying at the house, being respectful of my space at the hotel. It's also perfectly calibrated to make me feel like I'm the crazy one. You're not crazy. Then why does this feel insane? I'm sitting in a hotel room that costs $400 a night, burning through money I technically don't have access to yet, hiding from a man who's never hit me or cheated on me or done anything a divorce court would care about. What's my story? He was too controlling? He made me feel small. Good luck making that sound like anything other than buyer's remorse. Ethan could hear the panic in her voice, the way doubt crept in when you were alone with your thoughts for too long. Do you want to get out of that hotel room? And go where? Anywhere. Take a walk. Get lunch. Remind yourself what it feels like to make a choice without asking permission. Silence on the other end, then a shaky laugh. That's actually good advice. I'm unemployed and possibly unemployable. I've got nothing but time to dispense advice. Ethan, I'm sorry, this is my fault. It's not. I made my own choices. Meet me somewhere. We'll figure out the rest later. They met at a diner in Koreatown, the kind of place that served breakfast all day and didn't care what you looked like or how long you stayed. Clara arrived wearing sunglasses indoors and a baseball cap pulled low, looking like someone who'd seen too many movies about going incognito. Subtle, Ethan said as she slid into the booth across from him. I feel ridiculous. But also, what if someone sees me? What if it gets back to Marcus that we're meeting? We're two people having lunch. That's not illegal. It's not illegal, but it's ammunition. His lawyers will use it. They'll say I left him for you, that this was an affair, that I'm unstable and impulsive and making decisions based on infatuation rather than reason. The waitress came by and Clara ordered coffee she immediately dumped too much cream into. Her hands were shaking slightly. Rebecca called this morning, Clara continued. The deposition is scheduled. Marcus's lawyers want to ask me about our marriage, about my mental health, about my relationship with you. They're going to make me explain why I want to leave a man who's never been anything but successful and generous and appropriate. And I don't have a good answer. I can't point to anything concrete. I just know that I can't breathe in that house, that I've been slowly erasing myself for 7 years. But how do you prove that? How do you make a judge understand that comfort can be a cage? Ethan thought about his conversation with Marcus in that glass office, about the tennis instructor and the yoga teacher and the photographer, about the systematic erasure of anyone who made Clara feel like more than furniture. You tell the truth, he said. You described the small things, the way he controlled your schedule, the way he made every decision seem like a joint discussion while somehow the outcome was always what he wanted. The way he kept your paintings in storage instead of letting you have them where you could see them. The way he handled all the money so you never had to worry, which sounds generous until you realize it means you have no idea what you actually have access to. Clara was crying now, silent tears that she wiped away with the back of her hand. He called this morning and asked if I was feeling better, like this was a headache, like I just needed rest and then everything would go back to normal. And the worst part is, there was a moment where I almost believed him, where I thought maybe I'm just being dramatic. Maybe this is just what marriage is. Maybe everyone feels this way and they just handle it better. Do you really believe that? No, but it would be easier if I did. Their food arrived, pancakes for him, toast for her that she didn't touch. The diner was filling up with the lunch crowd, mostly older Korean men reading newspapers and young people working on laptops, everyone absorbed in their own small dramas. I called my mother last night, Clara said quietly. Told her I was leaving Marcus. Do you know what she said? She said, "Don't do anything rash, darling. Marriage takes work. All the good ones do." Then she reminded me that Marcus has been very good to our family, that my father's medical bills would have bankrupted them if Marcus hadn't helped. She didn't say I owed him. She didn't have to. That's not your debt to pay. Isn't it? Marcus paid for my father's cancer treatment. He helped my sister buy her house. He's been nothing but generous to everyone in my life. How do I walk away from that? How do I be the person who destroys everything because she's unhappy? Ethan set down his fork. My father died 6 months after he retired. You know what I remember from the funeral? Not the people telling my mother how lucky she was to have had such a stable, reliable husband. I remember my uncle pulling me aside and saying, "Don't make your father's mistake. Don't wait until it's over to figure out you never lived." That stayed with me, because my father was a good man who did everything right and died having never taken a risk, never chased anything that scared him, never asked for more than what was safe and guaranteed. You think I'm being selfish. I think you're being brave. There's a difference. Clara picked up her coffee, put it down without drinking. Rebecca says the deposition is going to be brutal. Marcus's lawyers are going to try to prove I'm mentally unstable. They've already subpoenaed my therapy records. Apparently wanting to talk to someone about feeling trapped in your marriage is evidence of instability rather than self-awareness. Can they do that? In a divorce proceeding? Apparently yes. They can ask about medication, about diagnoses, about every session where I talked about feeling isolated or controlled, and then they'll use it to suggest I can't be trusted to make rational decisions about property division or anything else. The injustice of it made Ethan's chest tight. What does Rebecca say? She says we knew this would be ugly, that Marcus is scared, which makes him dangerous, that the fact he's going this hard this fast means he knows he's losing control and he's trying to get it back the only way he knows how, through intimidation and legal maneuvering. Clara finally took a sip of coffee. She also said you're being deposed the same day, that Marcus's team is going to try to establish that you and I are romantically involved, that you're biased, that your testimony is worthless because you're lying to help me. Let them try. Ethan, they're going to destroy your credibility. They're going to dig into your background, your finances, every mistake you've ever made. They're going to paint you as an opportunist trying to take advantage of a vulnerable woman. This is going to follow you. I know. Then why are you doing this? Ethan thought about that question, about the real answer underneath the obvious one. Brian! Because 3 years ago, I took a job being invisible. I got really good at it. So good that I started to forget I was even there. And then I spent one night listening to someone talk about what it feels like to slowly disappear, and I recognized it. Not because I understood your situation exactly, but because I understood what it costs to live a life that looks right from the outside while feeling wrong from the inside. And I can't unsee that. I can't go back to pretending it doesn't matter. Clara reached across the table and took his hand. It was the first time they'd touched beyond a handshake, and Ethan felt the weight of it. The way this simple gesture would be photographed, if anyone was watching, would be presented as evidence of something that wasn't quite true, but also wasn't quite false. When this is over, she said, when the divorce is final and the lawyers are done and I'm figuring out what my life looks like when I'm actually in charge of it, I want to take you to dinner, a real one. Not hiding in a diner in Koreatown, not worried about who might see us. Just two people who went through something terrible and came out the other side. I'd like that. She pulled her hand back and the moment passed. I should go. Rebecca wants to prep me for the deposition, and apparently it's going to take days. She says I need to be ready for every possible question, every angle they might use to make me look unstable or vindictive or gold-digging. You're none of those things. Tell that to Marcus's lawyers. She stood, adjusted her ridiculous sunglasses. Thank you for meeting me. For not making me feel crazy. After she left, Ethan sat in the booth for another hour, drinking bad coffee and watching Koreatown move past the window. His phone buzzed with the text from a number he recognized. His old manager from the Jiffy Lube. Heard you're back on the market. We could use someone with your experience. Not glamorous, but it's steady work. Ethan stared at the message for a long time. Steady work, reliable income. A return to the life he'd had before Marcus Vaughn, before expensive suits and invisible servitude, before he'd learned what it cost to be comfortable. He texted back, "Thanks, I'll think about it." But even as he sent it, he knew he wouldn't take the job. Couldn't take it. Something had shifted in him that night at the Blue Room, some fundamental understanding about the difference between safety and surrender. Going back would feel like admitting the last 3 years had been wasted, that the choice to walk away had been naive rather than necessary. His phone rang again. Rebecca Chen. "We have a problem," she said without preamble. Marcus's team just filed a motion suggesting Clara is mentally incompetent to handle her own affairs. They're claiming she's having a breakdown, that she's not capable of making rational decisions about the divorce, and that the court should appoint a conservator to manage her interests. Can they do that? They can file anything they want. Whether it goes anywhere is another question. But it's a strategic move. It puts Clara on the defensive, forces her to prove she's sane instead of focusing on the actual issues in the marriage. It's also designed to humiliate her, to make her feel small and powerless, which is exactly Marcus's pattern. What do? We fight it. We have Clara evaluated by an independent psychiatrist who will testify that she's perfectly competent. We document the pattern of control and intimidation. And we use your deposition to establish that this is Marcus's standard operating procedure. When he can't control the narrative, he attacks the credibility of anyone who opposes him. Rebecca paused. Which brings me to the other problem. Marcus's team has started background research on you. They've found some things. Ethan's stomach dropped. What things? Your father's death was ruled a suicide. You didn't mention that. The word hung in the air between them, heavy with implications Ethan had spent years trying to outrun. It was. He hung himself in his garage 6 months after he retired. I don't talk about it because it doesn't have anything to do with any of this. Marcus's lawyers are going to suggest it has everything to do with this. They're going to paint a picture of you as someone with unresolved trauma around authority figures and success, someone who's projecting your issues with your father onto Marcus. They're going to suggest your involvement in this case is emotionally motivated rather than factually based. That's insane. That's strategy. They're going to make this about you being damaged and Clara being unstable, two broken people making bad decisions together. It doesn't have to be true. It just has to create reasonable doubt about your credibility. Ethan closed his eyes. He'd told exactly 3 people about his father's suicide: his mother, his uncle, and a therapist he'd seen for 6 months after it happened. The idea of it being discussed in a deposition, analyzed by lawyers, used as evidence that he couldn't be trusted, felt like a violation of something sacred. Can they use that? He asked. They can bring it up. Whether the court considers it relevant is another question. But Ethan, I need you to be prepared. This deposition isn't going to be pleasant. They're going to go after everything: your employment history, your finances, your personal life, your father's death. They're going to try to make you angry, make you defensive, make you look like you have an agenda beyond just telling the truth. What should I do? Tell the truth, stay calm, don't let them provoke you, and remember that everything you say is being recorded and will be used to either help or hurt Clara's case. You're not just a witness, you're a character in the story they're trying to tell, and they want you to play the villain. After they hung up, Ethan sat in the diner until the waitress started giving him pointed looks about the table. He paid the check and walked out into the afternoon heat, the city stretching out in all directions, full of people who had their lives figured out in ways he clearly didn't. His father had worked for 30 years at the same factory, had saved carefully, had done everything the right way. And then he'd retired and discovered that all that security had been built on the foundation of never asking what he actually wanted, never taking risks, never choosing discomfort over stability. 3 months later, he'd written a note apologizing to Ethan's mother for being weak, had walked into the garage, and had made the only choice that felt entirely his own. Ethan had spent years angry at his father for that choice, for the waste of it, for the cowardice. But standing on a Koreatown street corner with no job and a looming legal battle, and the certainty that he'd made his life significantly harder for no tangible gain, he understood something he hadn't before. His father hadn't been weak. He'd been exhausted from a lifetime of being strong in all the wrong ways. The deposition was in 2 weeks. Ethan spent the time preparing with Rebecca, going over every detail of his 3 years working for Marcus Vaughn, anticipating every angle the lawyers might use to discredit him. They practiced his responses to questions about Clara, about his father, about his motivations for getting involved. "They're going to ask if you're in love with her," Rebecca said during one session. "What should I say?" "The truth. Whatever that is." Ethan thought about it. "I'm not in love with her. I barely know her. But I saw something in her that I recognized, and I couldn't walk away from that. Is that love? I don't think so. But it's something." "That's good. That's honest. Use that." The day of the deposition arrived with the kind of perfect Los Angeles weather that felt personally offensive. Ethan wore his best suit, which was saying something since all his suits were best suits now, and met Rebecca outside the office building where Marcus's lawyers worked. "Remember," she said as they rode the elevator up, "stay calm. Answer only the question that's asked. Don't volunteer information. And if you need a break, we can take one." The conference room was aggressively corporate. Glass walls, a table that could seat 20, a view of downtown that was probably supposed to be intimidating. Marcus's lead attorney was a man named David Rothstein, 50-ish, with the kind of expensive haircut that was designed to look casual but probably cost more than Ethan's monthly rent. "Mr. Park, thank you for being here." Rothstein's smile was professional and completely empty of warmth. "Let's begin. Please state your full name for the record." "Ethan James Park. And you were employed by Marcus Vaughn from March 2022 to April 2025. Is that correct?" "Yes." "In what capacity?" "I was his driver." "Just his driver? You didn't have other responsibilities?" "I drove him to meetings, appointments, events. Sometimes I ran errands, dry cleaning, packages, that kind of thing." Rothstein nodded, making notes. "And during your employment, did you have much interaction with Mrs. Vaughn?" "Some. I drove her places when Mr. Vaughn requested it." "How often would you say you drove Mrs. Vaughn?" "Maybe once a week, sometimes more, sometimes less." "And during these drives, did you and Mrs. Vaughn have conversations?" "Not usually. She mostly read or worked on her phone." "But there were exceptions?" "Occasionally." Rothstein leaned back in his chair, studying Ethan with the intensity of someone looking for cracks in a foundation. "Let's talk about the night of April 15th. You picked up Mrs. Vaughn from an art gallery at approximately 11 p.m. Is that correct?" "Yes." "And instead of taking her home as instructed, you took her to a jazz bar in Echo Park. Why?" "She asked me to." "She asked you to directly disobey your employer's instructions?" Rebecca cut in. "That's not what he said. He said Mrs. Vaughn asked him to drive her somewhere other than home. That's not disobedience, that's responding to a request from a passenger." Rothstein ignored her. "Mr. Park, did it occur to you that Mrs. Vaughn might have been in an impaired state? That she might not have been capable of making rational decisions about where she should go? She'd had some wine, she wasn't impaired. But you're not a medical professional. You're not qualified to determine someone's level of impairment." "She was coherent. She knew what she was asking for." "What she was asking for was to be alone with you in a private setting. Did that seem appropriate?" Ethan felt his jaw tighten. "She was asking for someone to listen. That's what I did." "You listened for 5 hours, in a bar, and then on a mountain overlook, alone in a car with your employer's wife. And during all this listening, did Mrs. Vaughn tell you she was planning to leave her husband?" "She talked about being unhappy." "Did she tell you she'd already contacted a divorce attorney?" "Yes." "And what was your response?" "I didn't have one. I listened." Rothstein pulled out a photograph. The picture of Ethan and Clara sitting on the hood of the Mercedes, faces close together in conversation. "This doesn't look like listening, Mr. Park. This looks like intimacy." "We were talking." "In a way that you talk to any passenger?" in a way that I'd talk to another person who was going through something difficult. A person you barely knew. Yes. Why? Why would you invest 5 hours of your time in the personal problems of someone you barely knew? Ethan looked at Rothstein across that conference table and realized this was the moment everything hinged on. The lawyer wanted anger, defensiveness, something that would make Ethan look unstable or motivated by emotion rather than truth. The room felt airless despite the expensive ventilation system. Because I recognized something, Ethan said quietly. I recognized what it looks like when someone's disappearing inside a life that looks perfect from the outside. That's very poetic, Mr. Park, but let's be specific. You recognize this because of your father's suicide, correct? Rebecca's hand came down on the table. That's irrelevant, and you know it. Is it? Mr. Park's father spent 30 years in what looked like a stable, successful life, then killed himself shortly after retirement. I think it's entirely relevant to understanding why Mr. Park might project his unresolved trauma onto a situation that doesn't warrant it. Ethan's hands were clenched under the table, nails digging into his palms. My father's death has nothing to do with this. Doesn't it? A man who appeared successful on the surface but was deeply unhappy underneath. A pattern of doing what was expected rather than what was wanted. Doesn't that sound familiar? Doesn't that sound exactly like how you've characterized Mr. Vaughn's marriage? My father worked in a factory. Marcus Vaughn runs a financial empire. The situations aren't comparable. But the feelings are, aren't they? The sense of being trapped by expectations, the slow erosion of autonomy. You saw your father live that way for 30 years and then end his life over it. So when you encountered Mrs. Vaughn expressing similar feelings, you didn't see a woman having a temporary crisis in an otherwise stable marriage. You saw your father, and you decided to save her in a way you couldn't save him. The accuracy of it was like a knife. Ethan forced himself to breathe, to stay calm, to remember Rebecca's coaching. Mrs. Vaughn's situation is real. It's not a projection. According to you, but you've admitted you barely knew her before that night. You'd had minimal interaction over 3 years. Yet after one conversation, you were convinced her marriage was so unbearable that you were willing to lose your job, testify in her divorce, and potentially destroy your own career. That's not rational behavior, Mr. Park. That's someone acting out of unresolved psychological issues. Or it's someone who saw another person in pain and tried to help. Rothstein smiled slightly. Let's talk about that help. After the night of April 15th, how many times did you communicate with Mrs. Vaughn? A few times, text messages, a couple phone calls. And during these communications, did you ever discuss the possibility of a romantic relationship between you? No. Never? Not even hypothetically? Ethan thought about Clara's words in the car. When this is over, when the dust settles, would you want to get coffee? She mentioned getting coffee after the divorce was finalized, as friends. As friends, Rothstein repeated, making it sound absurd. Mr. Park, you're an unmarried man in your 30s. Mrs. Vaughn is an attractive woman going through a vulnerable time. Are you really expecting us to believe that romance never crossed your mind? What crossed my mind doesn't matter. Nothing happened. Nothing physical, perhaps. But emotional affairs are just as damaging, wouldn't you say? You became the person she confided in, the person she turned to when she was unhappy with her husband, the person who validated her worst feelings about her marriage. That's intimacy, Mr. Park, whether or not it involved physical contact. Rebecca leaned forward. Are you actually arguing that having a conversation constitutes an affair? Because that's an insane standard that would make every therapist, every friend, every confidant somehow culpable in relationship problems. I'm arguing that Mr. Park inserted himself into a marriage he knew nothing about, encouraged Mrs. Vaughn to blow up her life, and now expects us to believe his motives were purely altruistic. I'm arguing that his testimony is biased at best and deliberately misleading at worst. Ethan's phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it. I told Mrs. Vaughn what I observed during 3 years of working for her husband. That's not bias. That's information. What you observed, Rothstein said, pulling out another document. Let's discuss that. You claim Mr. Vaughn was controlling. Can you provide specific examples? He managed her schedule without consulting her. He made decisions about her social life, her activities, her access to money. He kept her paintings in storage instead of letting her have them where she could actually see them and use them. He managed a household efficiently. He made joint decisions with his wife about their social calendar. He preserved valuable artwork in climate-controlled conditions. Mr. Park, you're describing the normal operations of a successful marriage and calling it abuse. I'm describing a pattern of control disguised as concern. Based on what expertise? You've never been married. You have no training in psychology or relationship counseling. You're a driver who spent most of his time in the front seat while his employers lived their lives in the back. What qualifies you to judge their marriage? I watched. For 3 years, I watched a woman slowly disappear. Or you watched a woman who had everything: wealth, security, a husband who provided for her every need, and decided she was unhappy because that fit your narrative better than the alternative. What alternative? Rothstein leaned back and Ethan could see the trap he'd walked into. That Mrs. Vaughn is a privileged woman having a midlife crisis. That she's bored and restless and looking for drama to make her feel alive. That she found a convenient excuse to blow up a perfectly functional marriage in pursuit of some romantic notion of freedom. And that you, Mr. Park, with your unresolved issues around your father's death and your own feelings of inadequacy, were the perfect person to enable that fantasy. The room went silent. Even the ventilation system seemed to pause, as if the building itself was waiting to see how Ethan would respond. I don't think any of that is true, Ethan said carefully. But even if it were, even if Mrs. Vaughn is having a crisis or being dramatic or whatever label you want to put on it, she still has the right to leave. Marriage isn't a prison. Being provided for doesn't mean you owe someone your entire identity. Very noble. Let's talk about money. How much is Mrs. Vaughn paying you to testify? Nothing. Nothing? You lost your job because of your involvement in this situation. You have no income, mounting expenses, and yet you're donating your time to help a woman you barely know divorce her wealthy husband. Forgive me if I find that difficult to believe. Believe what you want. I'm not being paid. Not directly, perhaps, but surely there's been some discussion of compensation after the divorce is finalized, some understanding that Mrs. Vaughn would be grateful for your help? Rebecca cut in again. You're fishing and you know it. Either present evidence of financial arrangement or move on. Rothstein shuffled his papers with deliberate slowness. Let's approach this differently. Mr. Park, what are your current employment prospects? I'm looking for work. Having any luck? Some leads, nothing definite yet. And why do you think that is? You have experience in customer service, management, transportation, yet you've been unemployed for 3 weeks with no offers. Why? Ethan knew exactly why. Marcus Vaughn had made sure of it. The job market is competitive. Or perhaps word has gotten around that you betrayed your former employer's trust, that you violated confidentiality agreements, that you can't be trusted with sensitive information about the people who employ you. Those would all be reasonable concerns for potential employers, wouldn't they? I didn't violate any confidentiality agreements. I'm testifying about personal observations, which isn't covered by NDAs. A technical distinction that won't matter to most employers. The perception is what matters, Mr. Park. And the perception is that you're someone who turns on the people who trust him the moment it's convenient. Ethan felt something hot and dangerous building in his chest. Marcus Vaughn didn't trust me. He used me. There's a difference. Is there? He paid you generously. He treated you well. And the moment his marriage hit a rough patch, you sided with his wife and actively worked to help her leave him. If that's not betrayal, what is? It's choosing to tell the truth over protecting a comfortable lie. How wonderfully principled of you. Tell me, Mr. Park, when you're living in your car because you can't make rent and can't find work, will those principles still feel so important? When you're explaining to your mother why you can't help with her expenses anymore, will you still feel good about the choices you've made? Rebecca stood up. We're done here. You're harassing the witness. I'm establishing bias and motivation. Mr. Park has made himself unemployable in pursuit of this testimony. That's either remarkable stupidity or suggests he's expecting significant compensation from Mrs. Vaughn after the divorce. Either way, it undermines his credibility. They took a break. Ethan walked out of the conference room on shaking legs, found a bathroom, and splashed cold water on his face. His reflection looked exhausted, older than 32, like someone who'd spent too many years being careful and was now paying the price for one moment of recklessness. Rebecca found him there. "You're doing fine. He's trying to provoke you, and you're not taking the bait. He's right, though, about the job prospects, about my mother, about all of it. He's right about the facts. He's wrong about what they mean. You didn't do this for money or romance or to work out daddy issues. You did it because it was the right thing to do, and that matters." Does it? In court, does that actually matter? It matters to the judge. It matters to Clara. And it should matter to you. Rebecca checked her watch. "We have 15 more minutes. He's going to go after your father's suicide again. He's going to try to make it seem like you're unstable, like you're prone to dramatic decisions based on emotion rather than logic. Don't let him." They went back in. Rothstein was waiting with the patience of a predator who knew the prey was already wounded. "Mr. Park, let's return to your father. When he died, you were how old?" 29. "And you were working where?" "Managing a service center in Koreatown." "How long had you been in that position?" "About a year." "Before that?" "Retail, various positions." "So you'd spent your 20s moving between jobs, never really settling, never finding a career path. Would you say you were struggling to find your place in the world?" Ethan saw where this was going. "I was figuring things out. And then your father died. Suddenly. Violently, in a way that suggested he'd been deeply unhappy despite appearing stable and successful to everyone around him. That must have been devastating." "It was. Did you seek therapy after his death?" Ethan hesitated. This information wasn't public, which meant Marcus's investigators had been thorough. "Yes, for about 6 months." "And during that therapy, did you discuss your father's reasons for taking his life?" "We discussed my grief, my anger, my confusion about how someone could seem fine and be so completely not fine underneath." "Did your therapist suggest that you might have unresolved feelings about authority figures? About success? About the cost of conforming to expectations?" Rebecca objected, but Rothstein had already made his point. The narrative was clear. Ethan was a troubled man with psychological issues stemming from his father's suicide, projecting those issues onto Clara's situation, unable to distinguish between his trauma and her reality. "I had feelings," Ethan said quietly. "Everyone who loses someone to suicide has feelings. But this isn't about my father. This is about what I witnessed in Marcus Vaughn's marriage. What you think you witnessed, filtered through the lens of your own unresolved trauma. Mr. Park, isn't it possible that you saw what you wanted to see? That Mrs. Vaughn's complaints about feeling controlled reminded you of your father's final note, and you decided to save her in a way you couldn't save him?" "No." "No? You're certain? Even though by your own admission you barely knew Mrs. Vaughn before that night? Even though you had no context for her marriage beyond what you observed from a driver's seat? Even though your entire understanding of the situation is based on one 5-hour conversation with a woman who'd been drinking?" "I know what I saw, I know what I heard, and I know the difference between someone having a bad day and someone who's been systematically erased over the course of years." "Systematically erased," Rothstein repeated, his voice dripping with skepticism. "That's quite dramatic language for describing a marriage where the wife lived in a mansion, had unlimited access to money, and could do whatever she wanted." "She couldn't do whatever she wanted. That's the point. Every choice went through her husband. Every decision required his approval, even if he was subtle about it. Can you provide documentation of this? Emails where Mr. Vaughn forbade his wife from doing something? Text messages where he explicitly controlled her choices?" "It doesn't work like that. It's not explicit. It's just constant small pressures, constant gentle redirections, until you forget you ever wanted something different." "So, no documentation, no proof, just your interpretation of private conversations between a married couple, filtered through your own psychological issues and your apparent need to rescue women you perceive as trapped." Ethan felt something crack inside him. "I don't have a pattern of rescuing women. I spent 3 years being invisible, doing exactly what I was told, never questioning anything. And then I saw someone in pain, someone asking for help in the only way she could, and I couldn't pretend I didn't see it. That's not a psychological issue. That's called having a conscience. Rothstein smiled. And yet here we are. You've lost your job, destroyed your professional reputation, made yourself toxic to potential employers, and involved yourself in a legal battle that has nothing to do with you, all because of this conscience. Do you see how that might look irrational to outside observers? I don't care how it looks. Clearly. But the court does. The court has to determine whether you're a credible witness or someone whose testimony is compromised by bias, trauma, and possibly romantic feelings for the plaintiff. And Mr. Park, you haven't given me much reason to believe the former. The deposition lasted another 2 hours. Rothstein went through every detail of the night of April 15th, every conversation Ethan had witnessed between Marcus and Clara, every text message exchanged after that night. He asked about Ethan's finances, his mother's medical expenses, his student loans from a college degree he'd never finished. He painted a picture of a man drowning in his own mediocrity, desperate for meaning, willing to blow up other people's lives in pursuit of some misguided sense of purpose. By the time it ended, Ethan felt hollowed out. Rebecca walked him to his car, her face grim. "He did exactly what I thought he'd do," she said. "Made it about you instead of about Marcus. Made your motivations the question instead of Marcus's behavior. Did it work? In a deposition? Doesn't matter. This isn't trial testimony. But he's building a narrative for settlement negotiations. That Clara's case is weak because her main witness is compromised. That we should take whatever Marcus offers because dragging this to trial will just expose both of you to more of what happened in there. What does Clara think?" "I haven't told her yet. She's got her own deposition this afternoon." Rebecca looked tired. "Ethan, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Is there any truth to what Rothstein suggested? Any romantic feelings between you and Clara that might compromise your objectivity?" Ethan thought about that question, really thought about it. "I don't know her well enough to have romantic feelings, but do I care what happens to her? Yes. Does watching someone fight for their right to exist on their own terms matter to me? Absolutely. Is that bias? Maybe, but it's also just being human. That's good. Hold on to that, because this is about to get worse before it gets better." She was right. That evening, Ethan's phone exploded with messages. Someone had leaked details from his deposition to a gossip blog. The headline read, "Vaughn Divorce Drama. Driver Claims Dead, Father Inspired Testimony." The article was gleefully vicious, painting Ethan as an unstable opportunist with daddy issues trying to break up a successful marriage. The comments were worse. His mother called, "Ethan, what is this? Why is our family's private business on the internet? Marcus Vaughn's lawyers are trying to discredit me. I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't think they'd go this far. Your father's death is being discussed by strangers, people who didn't know him, who have no right to judge." Her voice broke. "This is what your principles cost? Our privacy? Our dignity? I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't fix this. Sorry doesn't make people forget what they've read." She was crying now. "Your father spent his whole life trying to do the right thing. He would be so ashamed to have his death used like this." The line went dead. Ethan sat in his apartment, in the dark, looking at his phone as the messages kept coming. Friends he hadn't spoken to in years asking if he was okay. Former colleagues distancing themselves. A few supportive messages, but mostly just shock and judgment, and the particular cruelty of people who didn't know him deciding they understood his motives better than he did. His phone rang. "Clara." "I'm so sorry," she said immediately. "This is my fault. I shouldn't have asked you to get involved. I shouldn't have—" "It's not your fault. They're destroying you, your father, your job, everything. And for what? So I can get out of a marriage that half the world thinks I'm crazy for wanting to leave? Maybe everyone's right. Maybe I'm just being dramatic, and this is all a huge mistake." "Do you believe that?" Silence. Then, "No. But I wish I did. It would be so much easier." "How was your deposition?" "Brutal. They asked about every therapy session, every prescription, every moment I've ever expressed dissatisfaction with anything. They made it sound like I'm emotionally unstable, like I can't be trusted to know my own mind. And the worst part is, by the time they were done, I started to wonder if they were right. If maybe I am just broken in some fundamental way, and this whole thing is just a symptom of that brokenness." "You're not broken." "How do you know? You barely know me." It was the same argument Rothstein had made, and Ethan didn't have a better answer now than he'd had then. Because broken people don't fight this hard. They give up. They go back to what's comfortable even when it's killing them. You're still fighting. Claire's laugh was bitter. Fighting, is that what this is? Feels more like drowning. Same thing sometimes. They talked for another hour, two people in separate apartments across Los Angeles, both wondering if they'd made a terrible mistake, both too far in to turn back. When they finally hung up, Ethan looked around his apartment at the life he'd built. Cheap furniture, library books, a view of a wall, and tried to remember why any of this had seemed worth it. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is David Rothstein. Mr. Vaughn is prepared to make a settlement offer that's very generous to Mrs. Vaughn in exchange for her agreement to proceed with the divorce quietly, without testimony from peripheral witnesses. Translation: take the money, drop the narrative about abuse and control, and leave you out of it. He's also prepared to write a letter to potential employers confirming that your termination was a mutual decision and that he has no concerns about your professionalism. All of this goes away. You both get what you want. Think about it. Ethan stared at the message for a long time. It was a good offer, better than good. Clara would get her divorce and enough money to never worry again. He'd get a reference that would erase the employment gap, make him hireable again, let him rebuild the life he'd destroyed. All it would cost was the truth. He called Rebecca. They sent you the offer? She asked. Yes. What does Clara think? She's considering it. Half of everything is still substantial, enough to start over, buy a place, set up a studio. And it would mean no trial, no more depositions, no more having her mental health dissected in public. It's tempting. But it means Marcus wins. Not the divorce, that's happening either way. But the narrative. It means he gets to tell everyone that Clara was just having a crisis, that there was no abuse or control, that he was a generous husband whose wife had some kind of breakdown. It means everything we've said about the pattern of behavior gets erased. Does that matter if Clara's free? Rebecca was quiet for a moment. I don't know. That's for her to decide. But Ethan, if she takes this deal, you need to take it too. Get that reference letter. Rebuild your career. Don't let this destroy your life. And if she doesn't take it, then we go to trial, and it gets worse before it gets better. A lot worse. Ethan looked out at his window at the wall he'd been staring at for years, at the small slice of sky visible above it, and made his choice. Tell Clara I'm in. Whatever she decides, I'm in. If she wants to take the settlement and move on, I support that. If she wants to fight, I'll fight with her. But it's her call, not mine. You're sure? No. But I'm committed anyway. He hung up and sat in the dark, waiting to see what came next, knowing that whatever it was, there was no going back to who he'd been before that night at the Blue Room, before he'd remembered what it felt like to be seen. Clara's answer came at 2 a.m. Ethan was lying awake in bed, staring at the ceiling water stain that looked like Florida when his phone lit up with her message. I can't take the settlement. I'm sorry. I know it would make everything easier for you, but I can't let him win. Not like this. He texted back immediately. Then we fight. You're sure? This is going to destroy both of us. We're already pretty destroyed. Might as well make it mean something. 3 weeks later, they were sitting in a courtroom that smelled like old wood and anxiety. The trial wasn't about the divorce itself, California law made that straightforward, but about the settlement terms and Clara's petition to have the court recognize a pattern of coercive control that justified a larger share of the marital assets and nullification of a prenuptial agreement she'd signed under what Rebecca argued was duress. Marcus sat at the defendant's table in an expensive suit that probably cost more than Ethan's car, looking calm and vaguely concerned, like a man puzzled by his wife's irrational behavior but determined to be patient with her anyway. His legal team was 5 people deep, all of them radiating the confidence of professionals who'd won cases like this before. Rebecca's team was herself and a junior associate who looked about 12 years old. All rise for the Honorable Judge Patricia Chen. The judge was in her 60s, Asian American, with silver hair cut in a severe bob and reading glasses that she peered over with the expression of someone who'd seen every variation of human dysfunction and wasn't impressed by any of it. This is a settlement dispute in the matter of Vaughn versus Vaughn, she said, her voice crisp. "I've reviewed the filings. Miss Chen, you're arguing that your client signed a prenuptial agreement under coercive circumstances and that the marriage was characterized by a pattern of control that justifies setting aside the prenup and awarding Mrs. Vaughn a larger portion of marital assets. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor." "And Mr. Rothstein, you're arguing that this is a straightforward divorce where both parties should be held to the terms they agreed to, and that Mrs. Vaughn is attempting to recharacterize normal marital dynamics as abuse to gain financial advantage." "Precisely, Your Honor." "Then let's proceed. Ms. Chen, call your first witness." Clara took the stand. She'd lost weight in the last month, and it showed in her face. Sharper angles, darker circles under her eyes, the look of someone who hadn't been sleeping. She wore a simple navy dress and no jewelry, deliberately stripped of the expensive accessories that had once defined her. Rebecca walked her through the early days of the marriage, the gradual accumulation of small controls that individually seemed reasonable but collectively created a cage. The way Marcus had suggested she quit teaching because the schedule was too demanding. The way he'd encouraged her to focus on charity work that benefited his business connections. The way every friend who didn't fit his vision of appropriate company had somehow drifted away until Clara was surrounded only by people Marcus approved of. "And the prenuptial agreement," Rebecca said. "Walk us through how that came about." Clara took a breath. "Marcus presented it to me 3 weeks before the wedding. Everything was already planned, the venue booked, invitations sent. My parents had already paid for things they couldn't afford to lose. He told me his lawyers insisted on it, that it was standard for someone in his position, that it didn't mean he didn't love me." "Did you have your own attorney review it?" "Marcus offered to have his attorney explain it to me. He said it would be easier than hiring someone new, that his lawyer could answer all my questions." "Did you ask for your own representation?" "I suggested it." Marcus said of course I could, but then he pointed out how expensive it would be, how it would delay everything, how it would look like I didn't trust him. He made it seem unreasonable to ask for something that should have been standard. Rothstein's cross-examination was surgical. He walked Clara through every decision she'd made in the marriage, pointing out that she'd always had choices, that nothing Marcus did was legally binding, that she could have left at any time. "You had access to bank accounts, correct?" "Joint accounts, yes." "With your name on them?" "Yes." "So you could have withdrawn money and left whenever you wanted?" "Technically, yes." "Not technically, Mrs. Vaughn. Actually, you had legal access to marital funds. You had the ability to hire an attorney, find an apartment, file for divorce. You didn't do any of those things until recently. Why?" Clara's voice was barely above a whisper. "Because I was afraid." "Afraid of what? Your husband never threatened you, never raised his hand to you, never prevented you from leaving. What were you afraid of?" "Of being wrong, of disappointing everyone, of finding out that maybe I was the problem, that maybe everyone was right, and I was just ungrateful and dramatic and broken." "So you weren't afraid of your husband. You were afraid of your own judgment." "That's what he wanted me to be afraid of. That's how it works. You don't build a cage with locks. You build it with doubt." It was powerful testimony, but Ethan could see the jury. There was no jury, just the judge, but he could see it in Judge Chen's face, trying to reconcile this narrative with the image of Marcus Vaughn, successful businessman, generous husband, man who'd never committed any obvious wrong. Then Rebecca called Ethan to the stand. He'd practiced this testimony for weeks, gone over every detail with Rebecca until he could recite it in his sleep. But sitting in that witness box, looking at Marcus's calm face, he felt the weight of what he was about to do. This wasn't just testimony. It was choosing a side in a war where the casualties were reputations, careers, futures. Rebecca established his credibility first. 3 years of employment, consistent performance, no disciplinary issues, trusted with sensitive information about Marcus's business and personal life. "During those 3 years," Rebecca asked, "what did you observe about the Vaughn's marriage?" Ethan chose his words carefully. "I observed a pattern of decision-making where Mrs. Vaughn's preferences were consistently overridden in favor of Mr. Vaughn's, but in ways that were presented as joint decisions or helpful suggestions." "Can you give an example?" "Mrs. Vaughn mentioned wanting to take a photography class. Mr. Vaughn suggested she was already too busy with charity commitments. It seemed reasonable until I noticed that the charity events were always ones that benefited his business relationships. Her time wasn't too valuable for his priorities, just for hers. Objection, Rothstein said. The witness is speculating about motivations. I'm describing a pattern I observed repeatedly over 3 years, Ethan said before the judge could rule. Mrs. Vaughn would express interest in something, and Mr. Vaughn would find a reason why it wasn't practical, wasn't appropriate, wasn't the right time. It happened with teaching, with art classes, with friends he didn't approve of, with anything that was hers rather than theirs. Judge Chen looked at him over her glasses. Continue. Ethan described the paintings in storage, the controlled social calendar, the financial management that kept Clara dependent even while appearing generous. He talked about the morning Clara had asked about setting up a studio, and Marcus had turned it into a negotiation, making her feel like she was asking for permission to use space in her own home. And what about the night of April 15th? Rebecca asked. What happened? Ethan recounted the whole thing, the gallery, the blue room, the conversation on Mulholland Drive. He didn't embellish. He didn't need to. The simple fact of a woman asking to be driven anywhere but home, of sitting in a jazz bar crying about paintings she wasn't allowed to see, of confessing she'd met with a divorce attorney 6 months earlier and been too afraid to follow through, it painted its own picture. Rothstein's cross-examination was everything Ethan had been warned about. His father's suicide, his employment history, his financial situation, his lack of qualifications to judge anyone's marriage. Every vulnerability exposed, every doubt magnified, every motivation questioned. Mr. Park, you lost your job because of your involvement in this situation. You've been unable to find comparable employment. You've been publicly humiliated, yet you're still testifying against your former employer. Why? Ethan had been asked this question a dozen times in preparation, had crafted careful answers that sounded rational and defensible. But sitting in that witness box, looking at Clara's face across the courtroom, he abandoned the script. Because I watched someone disappear for 3 years. I watched a woman who used to paint and teach and have her own life slowly become an accessory to someone else's. And then I spent one night listening to her remember who she used to be, and I realized I'd been disappearing too. Different circumstances, but the same pattern, trading yourself away for security, for comfort, for the illusion that invisible is the same as safe. My father did that for 30 years and then killed himself because he couldn't stand what he'd become. I'm not letting that be my story. And if I can help make sure it's not Clara's story either, then losing my job seems like a pretty small price to pay. The courtroom was silent. Rothstein looked like he wanted to object, but couldn't find the grounds. Judge Chen was writing something in her notes. No further questions, Rothstein finally said. The trial lasted 3 more days. Marcus testified with perfect composure, explaining each decision as reasonable, each control as concern, each restriction as protection. His business associates testified to his character, his generosity, his reputation. Rebecca countered with Clara's college friends who'd drifted away, the gallery owner who remembered Clara's talent before she got married, the community center director who'd been sad to lose such a gifted teacher. On the final day, Judge Chen delivered her ruling. I've listened carefully to all the testimony, she said, and I've reviewed the evidence presented by both sides. This is a difficult case because Mr. Vaughn has committed no crime. He hasn't been violent or obviously cruel, but the court recognizes that control can be subtle, that coercion doesn't always involve threats or force, that you can cage someone with expectations and doubt as effectively as with locks. Marcus's face remained impassive, but Ethan saw his jaw tighten. The prenuptial agreement is set aside, Judge Chen continued. Mrs. Vaughn will receive 50% of all marital assets to be divided according to standard California community property law. Additionally, the court awards Mrs. Vaughn an additional sum of $200,000 to compensate for career opportunities forgone during the marriage at Mr. Vaughn's encouragement. Finally, Mr. Vaughn is enjoined from any contact with Mrs. Vaughn except through attorneys and from making any public statements that characterize her as mentally unstable or incompetent. It wasn't everything. It wasn't vindication or validation or a public declaration that Clara had been right and Marcus had been wrong. But it was enough. It was freedom. Outside the courthouse, reporters were waiting. Ethan ducked his head and tried to avoid cameras, but Clara stopped on the steps, blinking in the afternoon sun. "Do you have a statement, Mrs. Vaughn?" someone shouted. Clara looked at Rebecca, who shrugged. "Your call." "I married someone I thought would make me happy," Clara said quietly. "And when I realized I'd been wrong, I was too afraid to admit it. Afraid of being judged, afraid of disappointing people, afraid of choosing myself over security. But staying afraid was killing me. So I left. And I'm grateful to everyone who helped me do that, especially the people who believed me when I barely believed myself." She looked at Ethan then, just for a moment, and something passed between them that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with recognition. Two people who'd chosen risk over safety, truth over comfort, freedom over fear. The reporters kept shouting questions, but Clara was done. She walked down the courthouse steps with Rebecca beside her, and Ethan followed at a distance, giving her space, understanding that this moment was hers. His phone was ringing. His mother. "I watched the news," she said without preamble. "They're calling you brave and stupid, sometimes in the same sentence." "Sounds about right." "Your father would have thought you were crazy." "I know. But I think he would have been proud anyway. In the end, when it was too late to matter, I think he wanted someone to choose differently than he did. To be brave instead of safe." Ethan's throat tightened. "Thanks, Mom. Come to dinner this week. Bring that girl if she wants to come. I want to meet the person who is worth blowing up your life for." It's not like that." "I know. That's why I want to meet her." The next few months were strange. Clara moved to Portland to live with her sister while the settlement was finalized. Ethan eventually found work at a car dealership in Burbank. Nothing glamorous, but honest work selling practical cars to people who actually needed them. His manager was a guy named Tom, who didn't care about Ethan's employment history as long as he showed up on time and treated customers with respect. The gossip blogs moved on to other scandals. The reporter who'd written the article about Ethan's father published a follow-up that was surprisingly sympathetic, framing the whole thing as a story about standing up to subtle abuse. It didn't undo the damage, but it helped. Ethan's phone rang less frequently. The text messages from unknown numbers stopped. Life returned to something resembling normal. Except normal felt different now. Smaller in some ways, but more honest, more his. 6 months after the trial ended, Clara came back to Los Angeles. The divorce was final, the settlement complete, the legal battles over. She'd bought a small house in Echo Park, nothing like the mansion in the hills, but hers. Chosen. Real. She was teaching art again at the same community center where she'd met Marcus, working with kids who couldn't afford private lessons but had talent worth nurturing. She texted Ethan, "Remember you promised me coffee? I'm buying, unless you're sick of my drama." They met at a place in Silver Lake, walking distance from Ethan's apartment. Clara looked different, still thin, still carrying the weight of everything she'd been through, but there was something lighter in her face, like she'd been holding her breath for years and finally remembered how to exhale. "So," she said, sliding into the chair across from him, "how's the car business?" "Honest. Simple. I sold a Honda Civic to a nursing student last week and actually felt good about it." "Weirdest feeling." "I know what you mean. I taught a class yesterday, and one of the kids, 7 years old, couldn't afford proper supplies, created this painting that was just raw and beautiful and true. And I remembered why I used to do this, before everything else." They talked for 2 hours. Not about the trial or the divorce or Marcus or any of it. They talked about Clara's new house, about the art studio she was setting up in the spare bedroom, about Ethan's coworkers and his mother's reaction to seeing him on the news. They talked like two people who'd survived parallel shipwrecks and washed up on the same shore. Not strangers, not quite friends, something in between that didn't have a name yet. "I need to tell you something," Clara said as they were getting ready to leave. "When all this started, when I asked you to drive me somewhere that night, I wasn't thinking about what it would cost you. I was just desperate, and you were there and you listened. I didn't mean for you to lose your job, to have your privacy violated, to become part of my mess. I know, and I'm sorry for all of it, for dragging you into this." Ethan thought about that carefully. "I'm not. I mean, the depositions were brutal and unemployment sucks, and having strangers discuss my father's suicide on the internet was pretty much the worst thing I can imagine. But I'm not sorry, because being invisible was killing me just as much as your marriage was killing you. We both needed permission to choose ourselves. We just gave each other that permission. Is that what we did? I think so. I think sometimes you need someone else to see you before you can see yourself. You did that for me as much as I did for you. Clara smiled, real and unguarded. That's a nice way to think about it. They left the coffee shop and walked through Silver Lake in the late afternoon sun. The city spread out around them in all its messy, imperfect glory. Neither of them had the lives they'd planned. Both of them had less money, fewer prospects, more uncertainty than they'd had a year ago. But they could breathe. A month later, Ethan got a call from Rebecca Chen. "I'm representing someone else," she said. "Different situation, but similar pattern. Woman married to a prominent attorney. No violence, no obvious abuse, just systematic control disguised as concern. She's terrified to leave. Her husband has resources, connections, the ability to make her life very difficult if she tries. And she asked me if I knew anyone who might be willing to testify about what they'd observed. Someone who understands what subtle abuse looks like." Ethan knew what Rebecca was asking. Knew it meant depositions and lawyers and possibly more public exposure. Knew it meant reopening wounds that had barely started to heal. "Give me her attorney's contact information," he said. "I'll talk to them." "You're sure? This could get ugly again." "It probably will, but some things are worth getting ugly for." He met with the woman 2 weeks later. Her name was Sarah Chen, no relation to Rebecca or the judge. She was 45, married for 20 years to a man who controlled every aspect of her life, while appearing to everyone else like a devoted husband. She sat across from Ethan in a coffee shop, hands shaking, and told him she didn't think anyone would believe her. "I believe you," Ethan said, "and I'll testify to that if it helps." It did help. The case settled before trial, but Ethan's willingness to testify gave Sarah's attorney leverage, gave Sarah herself the confidence to push back against a settlement that would have left her with almost nothing. She walked away with enough to start over, and that was worth something. Clara started dating the owner of the frame shop where she bought supplies for her classes. His name was Michael. He had 2 kids from a previous marriage, and he thought it was incredibly cool that Clara had once lived in a mansion but chose to teach in Echo Park instead. They took things slowly, both of them carrying enough scar tissue to know that rushing never worked. Ethan went on a few dates himself, a teacher from Glendale, a paralegal from Pasadena, a barista who wrote poetry on napkins. None of them stuck, but that was okay. He was learning to be comfortable with himself first, to rebuild an identity that wasn't based on being invisible or useful or whatever other people needed him to be. A year after the trial, Clara invited Ethan to an art show. Not hers, one of her students, a teenager named Maria who'd grown up in foster care and painted like she was exorcising demons. The show was in a community center gallery, nothing fancy, but the room was packed with people who cared about this kid's work, who saw the talent underneath the trauma. "You did this," Ethan said to Clara as they stood looking at Maria's paintings. "I taught her some techniques. She did the rest." "That's not what I mean. You chose to come back to this. You could have taken the settlement money and disappeared. Could have started over somewhere new where nobody knew about the divorce or the trial or any of it. Instead, you came back to the same community center where you used to teach, to the same work that doesn't pay well but matters. That took courage." Clara looked at him. "We both chose courage over comfort. That was the whole point, wasn't it? To stop being afraid of what we'd lose and start focusing on what we'd gain." "And did we? Gain something?" "I did. I gained myself back. That's not nothing." Maria sold 3 paintings that night. Clara cried when the teenager's foster mother bought the largest one, a piece about belonging that was almost painful to look at directly. Ethan watched from the back of the room, this small moment of victory, this evidence that choosing truth over comfort sometimes actually worked out. His phone buzzed, a text from Tom, his manager at the dealership. "Customer asking for you specifically. Says you helped her last month and she's sending her daughter to buy a car. Said you were honest and that mattered. Good work." Ethan showed the text to Clara. "Apparently being honest is actually good for business. Who knew?" "We did. Eventually." They left the art show and walked through Echo Park as the sun set, painting the sky in colors that would have been too dramatic if someone tried to put them in a painting. The lake reflected the light like a mirror, full of possibilities. "Do you ever regret it?" Clara asked. "Everything that happened, everything it cost." Ethan thought about his father in that garage, about the note apologizing for being weak, about 30 years of safety that had somehow added up to nothing he wanted to keep. He thought about his apartment in Silver Lake, his job selling Hondas, his slowly rebuilding relationship with his mother. He thought about the nights he could sleep without feeling like he was disappearing. "No," he said, "I don't regret it. Do you?" "Not even for a second." They reached Clara's car, a practical sedan she'd bought from Ethan's dealership, nothing like the Mercedes she used to be driven around in. She unlocked it, then paused. "Thank you," she said, "for that night, for listening, for seeing me when I'd gotten really good at being invisible. Thank you for the same thing." She drove away into the Los Angeles evening, and Ethan walked home through streets he was learning to love, past buildings that would never be featured in magazines but held real lives, real struggles, real victories. His apartment was still small, his view was still a wall, his furniture was still discount store assembly, but it was his. Chosen, not settled for. Lived in, not just occupied. A life built on truth instead of compromise, on courage instead of comfort, on being seen instead of being safe. His phone rang. His mother. "Did you eat dinner?" "Not yet." "Come over. I made too much anyway." Ethan smiled. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. He hung up and kept walking, through a city that was too big and too expensive and too imperfect to be anything other than exactly what it was. Above him, the sky was darkening, stars trying to break through the light pollution. Tomorrow he'd sell more cars. Clara would teach more classes. Both of them would keep building lives that didn't look impressive from the outside, but felt true from the inside. And that was enough, more than enough. That was everything.